Folks, I just wanted to explain why gambling and Trumpism are two of the worst addictions that humans can get into. They're some of the most difficult addictions because of how they work on your brain. Now, other things can be more addictive, like immediately addictive. If you try crack rock, you're probably going to want to smoke more crack rock. If you try gambling, you're not necessarily going to have to gamble again. Or if you try Trumpism, most people reject Trumpism immediately and are somewhat immune to it, although people can be tricked into it from other ways besides directly from things that Trump does to appeal to people. Trumpism, like racism, um, is it is racism, but it's like a evolved form, like the mega evolution of racism, and it gets into your brain and it affects your brain. And so I'm using gambling as a comparison because gambling does the same way. Gambling hijacks your brain and makes things that would have been enjoyable to you unenjoyable. So, for instance, here in Colorado, we legalized gambling. We made that mistake of legalizing sports betting. So now we have all these sports commercials, sports gambling commercials on our TV, which are terrible commercials. And one of them is like everybody's getting excited about curling, like the sport curling, because you can bet on it. Now, the fantasy in the commercial is that everybody's excited about curling, like it becomes a big trending phenomenon. When what they're trying to convey is that betting will make your sports more exciting, this much more exciting. The problem is when you bet on sports, when you get addicted to gambling and betting on sports, then you can no longer enjoy the sport. Like it gets to where you can't just enjoy the sport in the moment, but when you're trying to quit the gambling, you can't go back to watching that sport because it could trigger wanting to gamble again. So this is how, as much as people love sports in America, I mean, a lot of Americans really love sports. You can be a super huge sports fan, and gambling can ruin that for you. Gambling can take over the things in your brain that allow you to enjoy sports and make it where you can only enjoy sports gambling. This is how Trumpism works too. Trumpism preys upon racism and other things like that, but Trumpism supersedes those things. So, for instance, a lot of people who get into Trumpism think they're patriotic, or they used to think they were patriotic. They probably still think they're patriotic, but they claim to care a lot about America. But when you start looking at their actions and what Trumpism makes them do, they care more about Trump than they do America. Or here's a finer point. Confederate Republicans and Confederate types in America, in order to perpetuate their racism, have always claimed to believe in states' rights. So right now, there's a case before the Supreme Court that Colorado is going to kick Trump off the ballot. And one of the arguments is that states' rights. States have the right to set their elections. And so if you believe in states' rights, you should believe in Colorado's right to kick Trump off the ballot. But these guys have spent 200 years believing in states' rights, being all about states' rights. But when it comes down to states' rights versus Trump, they choose Trump. They're done with states' rights. They don't care about states' rights. Like they really give a crap about guns and gun protections for gun owners, unless that gun owner happens to be Hunter Biden. And if the gun owner is Hunter Biden, an enemy of Trump, then they're against guns. Like they'll turn against anything in order to turn for Trump. So they've turned against America, they've turned against states' rights, they've turned against guns. They could even be turned against other things, which you could do something good with that if it wasn't Trumpism that was hijacking what they're into to make it into something else. So Trumpism, just like gambling, will spoil your enjoyment of even states' rights. It'll spoil your enjoyment of America. It'll spoil your enjoyment of freedom. It'll spoil your enjoyment of free speech because you'll just be parroting a bunch of stuff Putin wrote for Trumpers to say. They're a bunch of clones. And it's a groupthink thing that, like, they would previously, claiming to value independence and things like this, they wouldn't buy into this, but Trumpism hijacks their brains, and you can't escape it once it starts hijacking the inner workings of your brain. This is what drugs do too, crack and other addictive drugs hijack your brain, but they do it through biochemical processes. So if you can get away from the chemicals, if you can get away from the drugs, or find something else to do besides the drugs, find a way off the drugs, then you can sober up and become unaddicted to drugs. How do you become unaddicted to gambling? Well, you also have to stop. You also have to hopefully find enjoyment in sports, for instance, again, if gambling has cost you your sports enjoyment. Could be a way to do it, but that could be too close. This is why I'm trying to point out that these are some of the worst addictions because they ruin other things that you're into. Now, sure, other addictions, drug addictions can make people, disrespect their mom or whatever it was that they wouldn't normally do if it wasn't, cause people to steal and do things that they wouldn't do if they weren't addicted to the drugs. Trumpism, gambling do that too. They can take over your mind in this way. Now, Trumpism takes over your mind in a similar way as gambling. There's not a substance involved. It's like you have to stop thinking and acting and associating with certain things in order to escape Trumpism. Thankfully, Trumpism is completely anti-American. So if you did have an American heart or some patriotism, American values, then you can just return to those American values and it won't trigger your Trumpism again once you see that Trump is working with Putin to destroy America. Once you see how these things are completely opposite, just like gambling isn't to enhance your enjoyment of sports, it will ultimately destroy your enjoyment of sports. So Trumpism will ultimately destroy your patriotism. Trumpism will ultimately destroy your soul, will destroy your humanity, and you need help out of that. It is an addictive thing. It wouldn't be so popular, or it's not that as popular as they make out, but it wouldn't be as popular as it is if it wasn't an addictive problem. And people rope each other into it, just like these commercials try to get people to gamble. People putting forth all this Putin propaganda are going to create more Trump Putineers and addict more people to this evil mentality. But what makes it so one of the worst addictions, just like gambling is one of the worst addictions that humans can have, is that there's not a substance that you can avoid and take out of your thing. It's a thought process that you have to be able to reject, expose, dismantle, um, re-educate yourself, whatever it is, deprogram yourself from the Putin propaganda. So hopefully this will help some Trumpers out there and hope some Trumpers help other Trumpers once you become a recovering Trump Putineer. You can help other people become American again too. But yeah, American values being completely anti-Trump and anti-Putin will help you out of Trumpism addiction if you remember that these things are opposite and start seeing the difference and start believing the truth that this guy's trying to destroy our country and doesn't care how many people he takes down with him. They already did a lot of damage with their lies about the Trump virus. They lied about all of that with a specific purpose to try to maximize its reach to hurt as many people as possible. And they've never felt consequences for that yet. But we should all overcome what they're trying to do to us as a country and to the entire world because the Trump Mutineers are in every country now. They're everywhere trying to uh, elect or coup leaders like this into power, and we need to call them out, stop them all together by working together. But we also need to work on each individual by letting them know that they're addicted and trying to help them like you would help another addicted person who's a victim of a network that's trying to addict people. Same thing for gambling. There's a network of people trying to addict people to gambling. There's a network of people trying to addict people to white supremacy, racism, and Trumpism. And we need to stop that network. We need to oppose it, and we need to join forces to stop them on a global and systemic scale. And we need to help the individuals out of the addiction of Trumpism and gambling. Thank you.